Sarah Mitchell stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the ivory silk dress that had hung in her closet for 3 years. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but the knot in her stomach told a different story. 28. She had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl playing dress-up with her grandmother's old wedding veil. The diagnosis had come 18 months ago. Delivered by Dr. Peterson in his sterile office with fluorescent lights that made everything look pale and lifeless. Unexplained infertility, he had said, the words hitting her like a physical blow. There's no medical reason we can identify, but conception appears unlikely without significant intervention. She had told Marcus that evening over dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant. The candlelight flickered between them as she watched. His face changed from confusion to understanding to something she couldn't quite identify. He had reached across the table, taken her hand, and said all the right words. They would try treatments. They would explore options. Love was enough. But love, Sarah discovered, wasn't always enough when faced with the weight of expectations and family pressure. Marcus came from a large Irish Catholic family where children were considered a blessing and a given. His mother, Catherine, had made no secret of her excitement about future grandchildren. She had already converted the spare room in their family home into a nursery, complete with hand-knitted blankets and a wooden rocking chair that had been passed down. Through 4 generations, the fertility treatments began with hope and ended with heartbreak. Month after month, Sarah endured the injections, the appointments, the invasive procedures that made her feel more like a science experiment than a woman trying to start a family. Marcus attended the first few appointments, holding her hand in waiting rooms filled with other couples wearing the same expression of desperate hope. But as the months wore on and the failures mounted, she noticed the subtle changes. Marcus stayed later at work. He stopped asking about her cycle. The conversations about baby names and nursery colors became fewer and farther between until they stopped altogether. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in November. Sarah sat in Dr. Peterson's office alone, having told Marcus she could handle the appointment by herself. The doctor's words washed over her like cold water. The latest round of treatments had failed. They could try more aggressive options, but the chances remained slim. She drove home in a daze, windshield wipers fighting against the November storm. The house felt empty when she walked in, even though Marcus was there, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread before him. He looked up when she entered, and she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carefully neutral. The conversation that followed would replay in Sarah's mind for months afterward. Marcus spoke about realistic expectations and different life paths. He talked about his career and the promotion he'd been offered in Chicago. He mentioned his college friend Jennifer, who had recently divorced and moved back to town. "I think we want different things," Marcus said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Maybe we always have." Sarah felt something break inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with her ability to conceive children. It was the sound of trust shattering, of promises being taken back, of love proving conditional after all. The wedding was called off 3 weeks before the ceremony. Sarah spent the morning of what should have been her wedding day returning gifts and canceling vendors. The dress shop owner, Mrs. Chen, a tiny woman with kind eyes, had hugged Sarah when she returned the ivory silk dress. "Love finds a way," Mrs. Chen had whispered. "Maybe not the way you planned, but it finds a way." Sarah had nodded politely, but inside she felt hollow. She moved back into her childhood bedroom in her parents' house, a space that felt both familiar and strange after years of living independently. Her mother, Linda, hovered with cups of tea and gentle suggestions about taking time to heal. Her father, Robert, expressed his opinion of Marcus in language that made her mother scold him, though Sarah secretly appreciated his loyalty. The small town of Millbrook had a way of making private pain public knowledge. Sarah could feel the whispers following her down Main Street, see the pitying looks in the grocery store. The story had spread through their close-knit community like wildfire. Poor Sarah Mitchell, left at the altar because she couldn't have children. The narrative stung because it reduced her to a single medical condition. Erasing everything else she was, she threw herself into work at the local elementary school where she taught 4th grade. Her classroom became a sanctuary filled with 24 energetic 9 and 10-year-olds who didn't care about her personal struggles. They just wanted someone to help them with long division and listen to their stories about lost teeth and soccer games. Was there, surrounded by construction paper, Valentines and spelling tests, that Sarah began to rebuild herself. She started volunteering at the after-school program, staying late to help kids with homework whose parents worked multiple jobs. She organized weekend reading programs and summer art camps. Slowly, she discovered that nurturing didn't require biology. But the whispers continued, and Sarah found herself avoiding certain places and events where she might encounter the pitying stares or well-meaning but hurtful comments. The annual Harvest Festival, where families gathered with their children for pumpkin picking and hay rides, became something she observed from a distance rather than participated in. One evening in March, as Sarah graded papers in her empty apartment she had finally moved into, her phone rang. It was her college roommate, Jessica, calling from Denver. "I have an idea," Jessica said without preamble. "There's a teaching position opening up here in the fall, elementary level, 4th grade. The principal is a friend of mine. You could start fresh, Sarah. New city, new people, new opportunities." Sarah stared out her window at the familiar streets of Millbrook, at the life she had built and rebuilt in the shadow of her broken engagement. The idea of starting over somewhere else, where nobody knew her story, where she wouldn't be defined by what she couldn't do rather than what she could, felt both terrifying and liberating. "Tell me more," she said quietly, as Jessica talked about Denver's school system and the mountains and the vibrant arts community. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not the desperate, medical hope of the fertility treatments, but something quieter and more sustainable. The hope of possibility, of a future that might look different from what she had planned, but could still be beautiful. That night, Sarah walked through her small apartment, looking at the life she had carefully constructed in the aftermath of her broken engagement. The bookshelves filled with teaching materials and novels, the walls decorated with thank you notes from students, the kitchen table where she planned lessons and graded papers. She thought about Mrs. Chen's words about love finding a way. Maybe the love she was meant to give wasn't to biological children she might never have, but to the students who needed an extra dose of patience and encouragement. Maybe her story wasn't ending, but beginning a completely new chapter. Outside, her window spring was beginning to show itself in small ways. Buds on the maple tree in her yard, early daffodils pushing through the soil, the promise of warmth after a long, cold winter. Sarah Mitchell made a decision that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. Denver welcomed Sarah with mountain air and endless blue skies that seemed to stretch forever beyond the urban skyline. The move had been both terrifying and exhilarating, like jumping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. She found a cozy, one-bedroom apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, with hardwood floors and large windows that let in streams of golden light. Riverside Elementary School was everything Jessica had promised. The building was modern and bright, filled with the energy of children from diverse backgrounds who brought their own stories and languages into the classroom. Sarah's new 4th grade class was a wonderful mix of personalities. She threw herself into creating engaging lessons and building relationships with her students. But it was the after-school tutoring program that truly captured her heart. 3 days a week, she stayed late to work with students who needed extra academic support or whose parents worked late shifts. The program served families from all walks of life, many of them single parents juggling multiple responsibilities. A crisp October afternoon, Sarah was working with Maria, a bright girl struggling with reading comprehension, when she noticed a commotion near the main entrance. 2 children, a boy and a girl, were standing by themselves, looking lost and a little scared. The boy appeared to be about 10, with sandy brown hair that needed cutting and a serious expression that seemed too old for his face. The girl was younger, maybe 7, with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile that she was trying hard to maintain despite obvious worry. "Excuse me," Sarah said to them, leaving Maria with her worksheet. "Are you waiting for someone?" The boy straightened his shoulders, protective instincts clearly kicking in. "Our dad is supposed to pick us up, but he's late. Gets caught up at work sometimes. Sarah knelt down to their level. I'm Ms. Mitchell. I teach here. What are your names? I'm Jake, the boy said, then gestured to his sister. This is Emma. She's in 2nd grade. Emma stepped closer to her brother, studying Sarah with curious green eyes. Are you the teacher who does the art projects? Jenny in my class said you let kids paint during lunch sometimes, Sarah smiled. That's me. Would you like to wait inside? My classroom, while we call your dad? It's getting chilly out here. Relief flooded Jake's face, though he tried to hide it. That would be okay, I guess. Sarah led them to her classroom, where she kept art supplies and books for exactly these kinds of situations. She called the main office to report the children's situation, while Jake helped Emma with a coloring book. Within minutes, Sarah's phone rang. This is David Chen, a voice said, and Sarah could hear the stress and exhaustion. I'm so sorry. Traffic was terrible, and I got held up at a job site. Are Jake and Emma okay? They're fine, Sarah assured him. They're in my classroom. Take your time getting here safely. When David Chen arrived 20 minutes later, Sarah understood immediately why his children adored him, despite his tardiness. He rushed into the classroom with worried eyes and an apologetic smile, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt dusted with sawdust. His resemblance to Jake was unmistakable, but his eyes held the same gentle warmth as Emma's. Dad. Emma launched herself into his arms, and David caught her easily, spinning her around once before setting her down.
I'm sorry, guys.
The client wanted last-minute changes to the kitchen cabinets, and then there was an accident on I-25. He turned to Sarah, extending a calloused hand. David Chen, thank you so much for looking after them. I hope they weren't any trouble. None. At all, Sarah said, shaking his hand and noticing the genuine gratitude in his expression. They're wonderful kids. Jake was packing up Emma's backpack with careful precision. Ms. Mitchell showed Emma how to make paper snowflakes. He reported to his father, and she has really good books. David looked around Sarah's classroom, taking in the colorful bulletin boards, the cozy reading corner with beanbags, and the student artwork covering every available wall space. This is a great classroom, he said. I can see why the kids like coming here. Over the following weeks, David's work schedule continued to create pickup challenges. Sarah found herself staying later and later, not minding the extra time with Jake and Emma. The children were a delightful company. She discovered they had been through more than most kids their age should have to handle. Their mother had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. David, who had been a weekend carpenter, threw himself into building his own contracting business to provide for his family. The work was demanding and unpredictable, but it allowed him the flexibility to be present for school events and sick days that his children needed. It's hard sometimes, Jake confided to Sarah one afternoon while Emma was in the bathroom. Dad tries really hard, but he gets sad sometimes. He doesn't think we notice, but we do. Sarah's heart ached for this little family doing their best to navigate grief and logistics. She began bringing extra snacks for the days when David was running late. She started a small lending library in her classroom so Jake and Emma could take books home. Emma became particularly attached to Sarah, often lingering after the other. Students had left to share stories about her day or ask questions about everything from why leaves change colors to whether teachers ever get scared. Her innocent questions and observations reminded Sarah daily of the joy she found in nurturing young minds. Miss you, Emma said one day while working on a math worksheet. Do you have kids? The question caught Sarah off guard, as it always did in Millbrook. Everyone knew her story, but here she had the luxury of privacy. Oh, I don't, she said simply. Emma considered this seriously. That's sad. You would be a really good mom. You're patient like Dad, but you smell better because you don't work with wood all day. Sarah laughed, despite the familiar pang in her chest. Thank you, Emma. That might be the nicest compliment I've ever received. Jake looked up from his book. Dad says some people are meant to take care of kids, even if they're not parents, like teachers and coaches and stuff. Says you're one of those people. The words stayed with Sarah long after David had collected his children and headed home. To whatever dinner he could manage to put together after a long day of work, she found herself thinking about this small family more than she probably should. Impressed by David's dedication to his children and moved by Jake and Emma's resilience, when parent-teacher conferences arrived in November, David scheduled his appointment for the last slot of the day. He arrived looking tired but determined, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing a button-down shirt instead of his usual work clothes. How are they really doing? He asked Sarah after she had shared the positive reports about both children's academic progress. Sarah chose her words carefully. They're both bright, caring kids who are dealing with a lot. Jake carries a heavy sense of responsibility for Emma, which is common in children who've experienced loss. Emma is naturally optimistic, but she's hungry for female attention and guidance. David nodded, unsurprised. I worry about that. I'm doing my best, but there are things. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to braid hair or talk about girl stuff. I'm learning as I go. You're doing an amazing job, Sarah said firmly. They clearly adore you, and they feel secure in your love. That's the foundation everything else builds on. When David left that evening, he turned back at the classroom door. Thank you, he said quietly. Not just for tonight, but for everything. Jake and Emma talk about you constantly. You've made their school experience something positive during a time when positive has been hard to come by. Sarah watched him walk down the hallway, his shoulders carrying the weight of single parenthood with determination and grace. She was beginning to understand that love did indeed find a way. Sometimes in the most unexpected forms and through the most unlikely circumstances. Winter arrived in Denver with a vengeance, bringing early snow that transformed the city into a winter wonderland, but also created new challenges for everyone, especially single parents trying to manage work schedules around school closures and early dismissals. Sarah found herself staying even later at school, not just for Jake and Emma, but for several other students whose parents worked jobs that didn't allow for weather-related flexibility. The week before Thanksgiving, Emma arrived at school with a fever and spent most of the day in the nurse's office. When dismissal time came, she was still running a temperature, and the nurse couldn't reach David at any of his numbers. Sarah volunteered to stay with Emma until contact could be made. My tummy hurts, Emma whispered, curled up on the small cat in the nurse's office, with Sarah sitting beside her, reading softly from a picture book. I know, sweetheart. We'll find your dad soon, Sarah murmured. Smoothing Emma's damp hair back from her forehead, Jake appeared in the doorway, his backpack slung over his shoulders, and worry etched across his young face. Is Emma okay? Mrs. Patterson said she was. Sick. She has a fever, but she's going to be fine, Sarah assured him. We're just waiting for your dad. Jake dropped his backpack and came to sit on Emma's other side. Dad's probably at the Morrison job site. They don't get good cell service there because it's up in the mountains. You won't get the messages until he's driving home. The matter-of-fact way Jake handled the situation broke Sarah's heart a little. This 10-year-old boy had clearly been through this before, had learned to be the responsible one when circumstances demanded it. Would you like me to drive you both home? Sarah offered. I could leave a note for your dad. Jake considered this. Seriously, do you know where we live? Sarah realized she didn't. In all their after-school conversations, she had never asked for their address. It was a reminder that despite the connection she felt with these children, she was still there. Teacher, not their family. I can call Dad's friend Mike, Jake said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. Dad gave me his number for emergencies. Mike has keys to our house. Well, Jake made the call. Sarah held Emma's hand and marveled at the maturity and problem-solving skills these children had developed out of necessity. When Jake hung up, he looked relieved. Hey, Mike is coming to get us. He said Dad is stuck in traffic coming down from Morrison, but he'll be home soon. Mike turned out to be a cheerful man in his 40s who owned a landscaping business and had clearly helped David out before. He thanked Sarah profusely and promised to make sure Emma got the rest she needed. The next morning, David appeared at Sarah's classroom door before school started, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking sheepish. I brought you coffee as a very small thank you, he said, offering her one of the cups. Jake told me what happened yesterday. I can't express how grateful I am. Sarah accepted the coffee, noting that he had somehow remembered she preferred it with cream and no sugar from the few times they had chatted during pickup. It was no trouble at all. How's Emma feeling? Much better. She's actually disappointed. She has to go to school today because she was hoping to spend more time with Ms. Mitchell, who tells the best stories," David said with a grin. "I think you've made quite an impression on both my kids." They stood in the hallway as other teachers and students began arriving. A comfortable conversation of two adults who had discovered they enjoyed each other's company. Sarah found herself noticing details about David she hadn't paid attention to before, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful way he listened when she spoke, the genuine pride in his voice when he talked about Jake and Emma. "I have a confession," David said, lowering his voice slightly. "The kids have been asking if they can invite you for Thanksgiving dinner. Emma spent 20 minutes last night explaining why teachers probably don't have anywhere to go for holidays. And Jake argued that you might have plans, but we should ask anyway." Sarah felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in a long time, not just the invitation itself, but the evidence that Jake and Emma had been thinking about her outside of school, worrying about her well-being the way she worried about theirs. "That's very sweet of them," she said carefully. "It's very forward of them," David corrected with a laugh. "I told them I would mention it, but that teachers have lives outside of school and probably have family plans. Do you have plans, I mean?" Sarah thought about the quiet Thanksgiving she had planned, grading papers, maybe calling her parents, heating up a frozen dinner while watching the parade on television. It sounded pathetic even in her own mind. "Actually, I don't have plans this year," she admitted. David's face lit up. "Then would you consider joining us? I should warn you, I'm not the world's greatest cook, but I can manage a turkey. And Emma insists on making cranberry sauce from scratch, even though it always turns out lumpy." The invitation felt like stepping across an invisible line from professional relationship into something more personal. Sarah knew she should probably decline, maintain appropriate boundaries between her teaching life and private life. But Jake and Emma had already carved out a space in her heart that had nothing to do with professional obligations. "I'd love to," she heard herself say. Thanksgiving at the Chen house was unlike any holiday Sarah had experienced. Their home was a modest ranch-style house in a neighborhood of similar homes. But David had clearly put his carpentry skills to use, making it special. The kitchen had custom cabinets he had built himself, and Emma's artwork was displayed in handmade frames throughout the house. The turkey was perfectly cooked. Though David seemed surprised by his success, Emma's cranberry sauce was indeed lumpy. But she served it with such pride that Sarah declared it the best she had ever tasted. Jake had insisted on making stuffing from a recipe he had found online, and his serious concentration while preparing it made Sarah want to hug him. But it was the easy conversation and laughter around the dinner table that made the day special. Jake regaled them with stories from school. Emma performed an impromptu dance to the music playing softly in the background, and David shared funny stories from his construction jobs. "Ms. Mitchell," Emma said as they were clearing the table, "this is the best Thanksgiving we've had since Mom died." The simple statement hung in the air for a moment, and Sarah saw David's expression grow soft and sad. She knelt down to Emma's level. "It's been the best Thanksgiving I've had in years, too," she said honestly. Later, as Jake and Emma played a board game in the living room, Sarah helped David with the dishes. They worked in comfortable silence, and Sarah found herself studying the family photos on the refrigerator. Pictures of David with a beautiful Asian woman who must have been their mother. Photos of Jake and Emma as toddlers. Family vacation shots that spoke of happy times before tragedy changed everything. "She was lovely," Sarah said softly, indicating a photo of the whole family at what looked like a mountain lake. David followed her gaze. "Lisa was the best person I've ever known. She would have liked you," he said simply. "She always said the most important people in a child's life are the ones who see their potential and nurture it without expecting anything in return." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, both from the compliment and from the obvious love that still filled David's voice when he spoke about his wife. "Jake and Emma are lucky to have you," she said. David dried his hands on a dish towel, considering her words. "I used to think I was enough for them, but watching them with you these past few months, seeing how they light up when they talk about school and the projects you do together, I realize there are things I can't give them, not because I don't want to, but because I'm just one person."
Oh.
Conversation felt intimate and important in a way that made Sarah's heart race. She was about to respond when Emma appeared in the kitchen. "Are you and Dad done talking about boring grown-up stuff?" Emma asked, "'cause Jake says it's time for pie, and I think he's right." Sarah and David looked at each other and burst out laughing. Whatever moment they had been building was interrupted, but something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement of connection that went beyond teacher-parent cooperation as Sarah prepared to leave that evening. Both children hugged her goodbye, with an intensity that suggested they didn't want the day to end. "Can we do this again sometime?" Emma asked hopefully. Before Sarah could answer, Jake spoke up with the seriousness that made him seem older than his years. "Dad, I think Ms. Mitchell should come to more family stuff. She fits." David met Sarah's eyes over his son's head, and in that look was a question and a possibility that both terrified and thrilled her. December brought both the magic of approaching holidays and the complexity of emotions that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Her relationship with the Chen family had evolved beyond the professional boundaries she was used to maintaining, and she found herself thinking about David, Jake, and Emma far more often than she probably should. The children's excitement about Christmas was infectious. Emma had started a countdown calendar and spent her after school time in Sarah's classroom making presents for everyone she could think of. Jake, ever the responsible one, had been quietly saving his allowance to buy gifts and asking Sarah's advice about what his dad might like. "It's Ms. Mitchell," Emma said one snowy afternoon while working on a construction paper ornament. "Are you going to be all alone for Christmas?" The question caught Sarah off guard, as Emma's directness always. "I'll probably visit my parents," Sarah said, though she hadn't made any firm plans. Emma looked troubled. "That sounds lonely. Christmas should be with people you love who love you back." Jake looked up from the book he was reading. "Emma thinks you should spend Christmas with us. She's been asking Dad about it for weeks." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "Your dad probably has his own traditions with you, too." "Actually," Jake said, with the matter-of-fact tone he used when delivering important information, "Dad said he would invite you himself, but he's worried you'll think he's being inappropriate. Or something. Adults make everything complicated." Before Sarah could respond, David himself appeared in the classroom doorway, slightly out of breath and carrying a bag from the hardware store. "Sorry I'm late. The supplier was missing half my order, and I had to track down cabinet hinges from 3 different stores." He stopped mid-sentence, noticing the sudden silence and the way Jake and Emma were looking between him and Sarah with barely contained excitement. "What's going on here?" David asked suspiciously. Emma bounced up from her chair. "We were just telling Ms. Mitchell that she should have Christmas with us because Christmas is better with more people, and she's already part of our family anyway." David's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, embarrassment, and something that looked like hope. "Emma, you can't just invite people to Christmas. Ms. Mitchell probably has her own plans." "Actually, I don't have firm plans," Sarah found herself saying. "And I would love to spend Christmas with you all, if you're sure it wouldn't be an imposition." Smile that spread across David's face answered her question before he could speak. Christmas Eve at the Chen house was a revelation in how traditions could be both honored and reinvented. David explained that Lisa had insisted on opening one present on Christmas Eve, always new pajamas for the whole family. This year, they had included Sarah in the tradition, and she found herself wearing matching flannel pajamas with reindeer patterns while they made hot chocolate and watched classic Christmas movies. Jake and Emma snuggled on either side of Sarah on the couch during a Christmas story, providing running commentary and sharing popcorn. David sat in his favorite chair, but Sarah caught him watching her more than the movie, a soft expression on his face that made her heart flutter. "This is the best Christmas Eve ever," Emma declared as David carried her to bed, her eyes heavy. "With sleep? It really is," Jake agreed, giving Sarah a spontaneous hug before following his father down the hall. When David returned to the living room, Sarah was staring at the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling in the darkened room. "Thank you for including me," she said quietly. "This means more to me than you probably realize." David sat down beside her on the couch, closer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for being here. The kids, ... He paused, searching for words. "They've been different since you came into their lives. Happier, more settled." Emma hasn't had nightmares in months, and Jake actually talks about school like it's something he enjoys instead of endures. Sarah turned to face him. They're amazing. Children, David. Any teacher would be lucky to have them. It's not just that you're their teacher, David said, his voice low and serious.
You genuinely care about them as people.
You see them for who they are, not who they lost or what they've been through. That's a rare gift. The space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility and unspoken feelings. Sarah was acutely aware of David's presence, the warmth of his body next to hers, the way he smelled like woodwork and Christmas cookies. Sarah, David began, then stopped, shaking his head. I should probably say this when I'm not tired and emotional and sitting under mistletoe. Sarah looked up and laughed. Emma had indeed hung mistletoe above the couch, probably with exactly this scenario in mind. 7-year-old matchmakers are apparently very strategic, Sarah observed. David laughed too, but his eyes remained serious. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of your kindness to my children, but I need you to know that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about Jake and Emma needing you and started being about me needing you too. Sarah's breath caught. David ... I know it's complicated. I know there are professional considerations, and the fact that I come with significant baggage and 2 children who've already been through too much loss. But I also know that I haven't felt this way about anyone since Lisa died, and Jake and Emma adore you in a way that goes beyond teacher appreciation. Sarah looked into David's eyes and saw vulnerability and hope and a love that had been building slowly over months of shared moments and growing trust. I need you to know something too, she said softly. I came to Denver running from a life. That didn't work out the way I planned. I thought I was broken, that I couldn't be the kind of woman who could build a family. But your children taught me that love doesn't always look like what we expect it to look like. David reached for her hand. What does it look like? Looks like staying late to help with homework. It looks like paper snowflakes and cranberry sauce and Christmas pajamas. It looks like 2 children who trust me enough to share their fears. And their father who trusts me enough to share his. David leaned closer. Sarah, I love you. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day. You stayed late with Jake and Emma. I love your patience and your creativity and the way you make my children feel like they matter. I love you too, Sarah whispered, the words feeling both scary and inevitable. I love all 3 of you. When David kissed her under Emma's strategically placed mistletoe, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before.
At the desperate,
Grasping love she had felt with Marcus, built on expectations and timelines and societal pressures. This was something deeper and more sustainable, built on genuine care and shared values and the daily choice to show up for people who mattered. They were still sitting close together, talking softly about what this might mean for all of them, when they heard small footsteps on the stairs. I just wanted to check if Santa came yet, Emma announced, appearing in the living room in her new reindeer pajamas. Not yet, sweetheart, David said, moving slightly away from Sarah, but not letting go of her hand. Santa doesn't come until you're asleep. Emma looked at their joined hands and smiled with satisfaction. Good. I asked Santa for something special this year, and I think he's already working on it. Jake appeared behind his sister, looking more awake than a child should at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Did you guys finally figure out that you like each other? Because Emma and I have been waiting forever. Sarah and David exchanged looks of amazement and amusement. How long have you 2 been plotting? David asked his children. Since Thanksgiving, Emma said proudly. Jake said you were being too careful, and I said Ms. Mitchell was being too shy, so we decided to help. Jake nodded seriously. We talked about it a lot. We know Mom can't come back, but we think she would want us to be happy. And Ms. Mitchell makes all of us happy. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she looked at these 2 wise, loving children who had somehow known what the adults were still figuring out. Come here, you 2, she said.
Okay.
Opening her arms, Jake and Emma snuggled against her on the couch, one on each side, with David's arm around all of them. In that moment, surrounded by the people she had come to love more than she thought possible, Sarah understood that her story wasn't about what she couldn't have. It was about what she could give and what she could receive in return. Spring brought new beginnings and difficult conversations. Sarah and David had been dating officially for 3 months, though their relationship felt like it had been building much longer through shared daily experiences and growing trust. Children had adjusted to the change with remarkable grace, seeming to view Sarah's more frequent presence in their lives as a natural evolution rather than a disruption. But Sarah knew that the conversation they had been avoiding couldn't be put off much longer. Her inability to have biological children was still a reality that needed to be addressed, especially if their relationship was heading toward something more permanent. The opportunity came on a Saturday morning in April, when Jake and Emma were at their grandparents' house for the weekend. David had suggested they take a hike in the mountains, something they had been talking about doing but never found time for with their busy schedules of work, school, and family activities. The trail at Golden Gate Canyon State Park was moderately challenging, winding through aspen groves and offering spectacular views of the Front Range. They hiked in comfortable silence for the first mile, both lost in their own thoughts as they climbed steadily upward. "There's something we need to talk about," Sarah said finally, as they stopped at a scenic overlook to catch their breath. David turned to face her, immediately picking up on the serious tone in her voice. "That sounds ominous." Sarah looked out over the valley below, gathering her courage. "Before we go any further with this relationship, you need to know something about me. Something that ended my last relationship and might affect how you feel about a future together." David sat down on a nearby boulder and patted the space next to him. "Whatever it is, we can handle it." Sarah wished she felt as confident as he. She sat beside him and took a deep breath. "I can't have children, David. I have unexplained infertility. We tried everything, spent thousands of dollars on treatments, but nothing worked. My fiancé eventually decided he wanted a different kind of life, one that included biological children." She waited for David's reaction, braced for the subtle shift in his expression that would signal the beginning of the end. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had told him. "How long did you try?" he asked finally. "Years of treatments. Before that, we had been trying naturally for about a year." Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly. The doctors said there was no medical reason they could identify, but conception was extremely unlikely without intervention, and even then, the chances were slim. David nodded slowly. "That must have been incredibly difficult. I can't imagine the emotional toll of going through that." Sarah was surprised by his response. She had expected questions about alternatives or suggestions about trying again with better doctors. It was. But what was worse was watching someone I thought loved me unconditionally decide that his desire for biological children was more important than our relationship. "Marcus was an idiot," David said with quiet conviction. Sarah looked at him in surprise. "You don't even know him." "I know enough. I know he had a woman who would have been an amazing mother to his children, biological or otherwise. And he threw that away because he was more concerned with genetics than with love." David took her hand. "Sarah, do you think Jake and Emma love me less because I'm not their biological father?" "Of course not. You adopted them, didn't you?" David shook his head. "No, I'm their biological father. But Lisa and I struggled with infertility too, for 3 years. We went through the same treatments you did, the same monthly disappointments, the same questions about what was wrong with us. We were just about to start the adoption process when Lisa got pregnant with Jake. Emma came 2 years later. Another surprise after we had convinced ourselves Jake would be our only biological child." Sarah stared at him, processing this information. "You never told me?" "It never seemed relevant. But now I realize it's completely relevant, because I know exactly what you went through. I know how it feels to want something so desperately and feel like your body is betraying you. I know how it feels to wonder if you're being punished for something or if you're just fundamentally broken." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Did you ever doubt whether Lisa was enough? Whether your relationship could survive if you never had children?" "Never," David said firmly. "Lisa was everything to me. If we had never had biological children, we would have found other ways to build our family. There are so many children who need love, Sarah. Biology is just one way to create a family, not the only way or even the best way." They sat in silence for several minutes. Watching hawks circle in the distance and listening to the wind through the aspen trees, Sarah felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "Jake and Emma have been asking me when you're going to officially become part of our family," David said eventually, not subtle about it. "Last week Emma asked if you would be their stepmother or their bonus mother because she heard that term at school and liked it better." Sarah laughed through her tears. "What did you tell her?" "Told her that was up to you and me to figure out together, that I hoped you would want to be part of our family officially someday." David turned to face her fully. "I know this is probably too soon to be having this conversation, but I love you, Sarah. I love you exactly as you are. And I can't imagine a future that doesn't include you. Jake and Emma feel the same way, even knowing that if we get married, there will never be more children, that our family will always be the four of us." David smiled. "Sarah, I already have 2 children who need a mother figure who will love them unconditionally, support their dreams, and be there for all, big and small moments of their lives. I can't think of anything I could want more than that." Sarah felt the last of her walls crumbling. "I love them too. I love all 3 of you more than I ever thought possible." "Then marry me," David said simply. "Not today, not next week, but someday when you're ready. Marry me and be Jake and Emma's bonus mother, and let us be the family we've all been wanting." Sarah looked into David's eyes and saw the same love and certainty she felt in her own heart. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I want that more than anything." David kissed her there on the mountain, with the Colorado sky endless above them and the promise of a future stretching out like the trail ahead. When they broke apart, Sarah felt transformed, not by magic, but by the simple recognition that she was already home. They hiked back down the mountain holding hands, talking about practical things like timing and rings and how to tell the children. But underneath the logistics was a deeper conversation about building a life together based on love and choice, rather than obligation and expectation. "There's one more thing," Sarah said as they reached the parking lot. "I want to adopt Jake and Emma officially, if they're interested, and if you think it's appropriate. I want them to know that my love for them isn't conditional on my relationship with you." David stopped walking and pulled her into a fierce hug. "They're going to be over the moon. You know, Emma has been practicing writing Emma Chen Mitchell in her notebook, right?" Sarah laughed, her heart full to bursting. "She told me she was working on her cursive." As they drove back toward town, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The heartbreak and disappointment that had felt like the end of her story had actually been the beginning of something better than she had ever imagined. She had learned that families could be built in many ways, that love was more about choice than chance, and that sometimes the greatest gifts came in forms we never expected. When they picked up Jake and Emma from their grandparents' house that evening, both children immediately sensed that something had changed. "You look different," Emma observed, studying Sarah's face carefully. "Happy different." Jake was more direct. "Did you guys finally decide to get married?" Sarah and David exchanged glances. "We decided we want to be a family," David said carefully. "All 4 of us together? How does that sound to you?" Emma whooped with joy and launched herself at Sarah. "I knew it. I knew Santa was working on my Christmas wish." Jake, ever the thoughtful one, hugged both Sarah and David. "This means Ms. Mitchell will be our mom, right? Like officially? If you want me to be," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "We've wanted that since Thanksgiving," Jake said seriously. "Maybe even before that. You already love us like a mom, so making it official just makes sense." As Sarah tucked Emma into bed that night, the little girl looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "I'm glad you're going to be my bonus mom. I think my first mom would be happy that Dad found someone who loves us all." Sarah kissed Emma's forehead, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I think she would be happy too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." Walking back to the living room where David waited with 2 cups of tea and a catalog of engagement rings he had clearly been hiding for weeks, Sarah marveled at the unexpected turns life could take. She had come to Denver broken and alone, convinced that her story was one of loss and limitation. Dead, she had found a love story that was bigger and more beautiful than anything she had previously imagined possible. The wedding took place on a perfect September morning in the mountains outside Denver. Exactly 1 year after Sarah and David's hiking conversation that had changed everything. They had chosen a small ceremony at a rustic lodge surrounded by aspen trees, just beginning their golden autumn transformation. With only close family and friends in attendance, Sarah wore a simple, cream-colored dress that Emma had helped her choose, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Jake had insisted. On picking himself from the meadow behind the lodge, David looked handsome in a navy suit, but Sarah's favorite part of his outfit was the boutonniere that Emma had made from paper flowers during one of their craft sessions. The ceremony was officiated by David's longtime friend and fellow contractor, Mike, who had gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion. As Sarah walked down the short aisle between folding chairs, she wasn't escorted by her father but flanked by Jake and Emma, both of them practically glowing with excitement and pride. "We practiced this," Emma whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm supposed to hold your flowers when you marry Dad." The laughter from their small gathering of loved ones was warm and genuine, setting exactly the tone Sarah had hoped for. This wasn't a formal affair built on tradition and expectation, but a celebration of a family that had chosen each other through love and circumstance. David's vows brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Sarah, you came into our lives when we didn't even know we were incomplete. You taught Jake that school could be joyful. You taught Emma that dreams are worth pursuing. And you taught me that love doesn't always look like what we expect, but it always feels like coming home. I promise to love you not just as my wife, but as the mother my children chose for themselves." Sarah's own vows reflected the journey that had brought them to this moment. "David, Jake, and Emma, you taught me that families are built through daily acts of love, not just through biology. You showed me that my story wasn't ending but beginning, and that the greatest gifts often come in forms we never imagined. I promise to love all three of you with everything I have, through ordinary moments and extraordinary ones, for all the days of our lives." But it was Jake and Emma who surprised everyone with their own contributions to the ceremony. They had secretly worked with Mike to prepare special vows of their own. Jake stepped forward first, his young face serious with the importance of the moment. "Sarah, we want you to know that we choose you to be our mom. It's not because we have to, but because we want to. You make our family complete." Emma bounced forward next, unable to contain her excitement. "And we promise to be the best kids we can be, and to help you and Dad love each other forever and ever." There wasn't a dry eye in the small gathering as Sarah knelt down to hug both children, her new wedding ring catching the morning sunlight. The reception was held on the lodge's back deck. The small dinner and dancing to music played through portable speakers. Sarah's parents had flown in from Illinois, and watching her father dance with Emma while her mother taught Jake how to waltz filled Sarah's heart with contentment. But the most meaningful moment came during the father-daughter dance, when David surprised Sarah by inviting Jake and Emma to join them on the makeshift dance floor. "This is how we dance as a family," he said simply. And Sarah found herself swaying to the music while holding his hands and watching Jake attempt to dip his new mother with various serious concentration. As the evening wound down and their guests began to head home, Sarah found herself standing on the deck looking out at the mountains, still wearing her wedding dress, but now barefoot and completely relaxed. "No regrets?" David asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "None at all," Sarah said, leaning back against his chest. "This is exactly the wedding I wanted to have, even though it was small, even though we didn't have all the traditional things." Sarah turned in his arms to face him, especially because of that. This was about us, about our actual family and our real love, not about meeting other people's expectations. Jake and Emma appeared at the sliding door, still in their wedding clothes, but looking tired from the excitement of the day. "Are we going home now?" Emma asked, hopefully. "I want to show you the surprise we made for your room." "What surprise?" Sarah asked suspiciously. Jake grinned. "We made you a sign that says Mom and Dad's room to replace the one that just said Dad's room." Emma decorated it with glitter. "Or so much glitter," David said with mock horror. I'm still finding it in places glitter should never be. As they packed up their few belongings and prepared to head back to the house that was now officially Sarah's home too, Emma slipped her small hand into Sarah's. I'm glad you married us, Emma said matter-of-factly. I married all of you, Sarah. Agreed. That was always the plan. The months that followed the wedding brought the usual adjustments of blended families. Though in their case, the blending had been happening gradually for over a year. Sarah officially adopted Jake and Emma in November. A legal proceeding that was far more emotional than she had expected. Standing in the courthouse with David, watching the judge finalize the paperwork that made her legally responsible for these two children who had been in her heart for so long, Sarah felt the final piece of her healing fall into place. Congratulations, Mrs. Chen, the judge said with a smile. You're now the legal mother of two very lucky children. Jake and Emma cheered as if their team had won the World Series. And Sarah couldn't stop crying happy tears. Later that evening, as they celebrated with pizza and cake, Emma made an announcement. I told my class that now I have two moms, she said proudly. My first mom, who is in heaven, and my bonus mom, who is here with us. Tommy Peterson said that was weird, but I told him it was actually pretty great because I'd get twice as much mom. Love. Jake nodded seriously. I told him that some kids don't even get one good mom, so having two just means we're extra lucky. Sarah looked around the table at her family, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. She thought about her conversation with Mrs. Chen in the wedding dress shop years ago. When the kind woman had said that love finds a way, she had been right, though love had found a way that looked nothing like what Sarah had originally planned. On quiet evenings, when the children were doing homework and David was working on a woodworking project in the garage, Sarah would sometimes think about Marcus and wonder if he had found the traditional family life he had wanted. She hoped he had, and she hoped he was happy. But mostly she felt grateful that their breakup had freed her to discover that there were many ways to build a family. And the most beautiful ones were often the ones that grew organically from love and choice rather than expectation and obligation. The elementary school where Sarah taught had become accustomed to Jake and Emma hanging around her classroom after school. Other teachers often commented on how natural she seemed with them, how clearly they adored her. What they didn't know was that every day she got to witness the miracle of children choosing to love an adult, who wasn't required by biology to love them back. Sarah had learned that motherhood wasn't about giving birth, but about showing up consistently with patience and care. It wasn't about creating children, but about nurturing the children who found their way into your life. It wasn't about biology, but about the daily choice to put someone else's well-being before your own. On Jake's 11th birthday, he gave her a card he had made himself. Inside, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for choosing to be our mom, and thank you for letting us choose you back." That card, now framed and sitting on Sarah's desk at school, reminded her every day that her story hadn't been one of loss and limitation after all. It had been one of patience and possibility, of love finding its way in forms she had never imagined, but now couldn't imagine living without. Sarah Mitchell Chen had gotten her happily ever after. Not the one she had originally planned. And as she tucked Emma into bed each night and helped Jake with his homework and built a life with David based on mutual respect and genuine affection, she knew that the unexpected version was infinitely better than anything she could have planned. For herself, love had indeed found a way, bringing her not just a husband, but a whole family who had been waiting for her just as much as she had been waiting for them.